The blood-red sun was setting over the harsh Texas landscape when Silas Irwin first caught sight of her alone figure stumbling across the dusty plains, a bundle strapped to her back that could only be a child. Through his spyglass, he could see she was exhausted, her gait unsteady as she pushed forward with desperate determination. Terlingua, Texas in 1878 was no place for a woman alone, especially not one fleeing with a baby. Silas knew that better than most. The small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Chizos Mountains had seen its share of desperate souls. But something about this one stirred something deep within him, something he thought had died 3 years ago alongside his wife and unborn child. Silas nudged his stallion, Thunder, down the rocky slope toward the woman. She hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on placing one foot in front of the other. Her dress was torn and caked with dust, her dark hair falling loose from what must have once been a neat arrangement. As he drew closer, he saw her stumble to her knees, and though she immediately struggled back to her feet, Silas urged Thunder into a canter. The sound of approaching hoofbeats finally caught her attention. Her head snapped up, terror evident in her face even from a distance. She clutched at the bundle on her back and began to run a futile attempt given her condition and the approaching horseman. Silas reined in Thunder 20 paces from the woman, who had backed herself against a large boulder, one hand protectively covering the baby, the other brandishing a small knife that glinted in the fading daylight. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse but steady. Silas raised both hands, showing they were empty. "Madam, I mean you no harm. You look like you could use some help." "I don't need your help," she snapped, though her legs visibly trembled beneath her torn skirt. Silas remained atop Thunder, giving her space. "Name's Silas Irwin. I run cattle about 5 miles north of here. My ranch is called Lone Star." The woman said nothing, her eyes darting past him, scanning the horizon. "You're looking for someone following you," Silas observed, "which means you're running from something or someone." A small whimper came from the bundle on her back, and her face softened momentarily as she adjusted the cloth without taking her eyes off Silas. "That little one sounds hungry," he said gently. "And you look about ready to collapse. The nearest town is Terlingua, still 15 miles southwest. You won't make it before dark, and these parts aren't safe at night." "I'll manage," she replied, but the knife wavered in her hand. Silas studied her face. She couldn't be more than 25, with striking features despite the dirt and exhaustion. Her eyes, though filled with fear, held a fierce intelligence. "I can offer you shelter for the night. Food, water, a safe place to rest, no questions asked," he paused. "Or I can ride on and pretend I never saw you, your choice." The baby's whimper turned into a full-fledged cry. The woman's resolve cracked slightly as she tried to soothe the child without lowering her guard. "How do I know I can trust you?" she asked. "You don't," Silas answered honestly, "but I give you my word as a gentleman that no harm will come to you or your child under my roof." The woman hesitated, clearly weighing her options. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains and the temperature was already beginning to drop. The baby continued to cry. "What's your name, madam?" Silas asked softly. After a long moment she replied, Vivian Lockwood." "Well, Miss Lockwood, you're done running at least for tonight." Silas extended his hand. "Let me help you." Vivian stared at his outstretched hand, then at the darkening horizon. Finally, she slipped the knife into a hidden pocket and stepped forward. "Just for tonight," she agreed warily. Silas nodded, dismounting from Thunder. He approached slowly, as one might a skittish horse, and offered a canteen of water. Vivian accepted it gratefully, drinking deeply before dampening a corner of her sleeve to wet the baby's lips. "May I?" Silas gestured to the horse. After a slight hesitation, Vivian allowed him to help her onto Thunder. The baby, now revealed as a girl no more than 6 months old with wisps of dark hair, had quieted to whimpers. Silas mounted behind Vivian, careful to maintain a respectful distance while still ensuring she wouldn't fall. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here," he explained, turning Thunder northward. "We'll be there before full dark." Vivian remained rigid in the saddle, though exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her wariness. As they rode, the baby fell asleep against her mother's chest, and gradually, Vivian's own posture began to slacken. By the time the modest ranch house came into view, she was leaning back against Silas's chest, half-conscious. "Miss Lockwood," he said gently, "we're here." Vivian startled awake, immediately tensing again. In the twilight, she could make out a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn and corral to one side, and what appeared to be a small vegetable garden. It wasn't grand, but it was neat and well-maintained. "It's not much," Silas said, "but it's home." He helped her dismount, steadying her when her legs nearly buckled. The baby stirred but didn't wake as they approached the cabin. Inside, a single large room served as kitchen, dining room, and living area, with a curtained-off section that presumably contained a bed. A fire was banked in the stone hearth, and Silas immediately went to stoke it. "Please sit," he offered, gesturing to a sturdy wooden table with 2 chairs. "I'll get you something to eat." Vivian sank into the chair, her eyes never leaving Silas as he moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency. He placed a kettle over the fire and retrieved bread, dried meat, and preserves from a cupboard. Soon, a simple meal was laid before her. "Eat," he encouraged. "Then you can wash up if you'd like. I'll sleep in the barn tonight. You and your little one can have the bed." Vivian's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" Silas paused, then sat in the chair across from her. 3 years ago, my wife, Sarah, died in childbirth along with our son. I couldn't help them." His voice was steady but laced with old pain. "I reckon helping you and your child might balance the scales a bit in God's ledger." The honesty in his words seemed to reach Vivian. She nodded slowly, then began to eat, her initial careful bites giving way to the hunger she'd clearly been suppressing. As she ate, she adjusted the baby, who was beginning to fuss again. "She needs changing," Vivian explained, "and feeding." "I have some clean cloths you can use," Silas offered, retrieving several squares of soft fabric from a chest. "And privacy if you need it." He started to step outside, but Vivian's voice stopped him. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," Silas nodded. "Just Silas is fine." "I'll be outside tending to Thunder. Call if you need anything." Under the star-filled Texas sky, Silas removed Thunder's saddle and brushed him down, all the while wondering what trouble had driven Vivian Lockwood to flee across this unforgiving land with an infant. Whatever or whoever she was running from, he found himself strangely determined to help her. When he returned to the cabin after giving her ample time, he found Vivian seated in a rocking chair near the fire, the baby contentedly nursing beneath a light blanket. Her face was clean now, revealing a beauty that even exhaustion couldn't diminish: high cheekbones, a straight nose, and full lips. Her eyes, he now saw, were a deep green. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the rocking chair. It seemed the most comfortable place for feeding her. Not at all, it was Sarah's chair. Silas busied himself preparing a pallet near the fire. "Does she have a name, your daughter?" A flash of something, pain perhaps, or fear, crossed Vivian's face. "Emma," she finally answered. "Her name is Emma." Silas nodded, not pressing further despite the questions that crowded his mind. "It's a beautiful name." "She's not mine," Vivian said suddenly, the words seemingly surprising even herself. "Not by blood, I mean. She stopped, pressing her lips together. "You don't owe me any explanations," Silas assured her, though curiosity burned within him. "I do if I'm putting you in danger by being here," Vivian countered. She looked down at the nursing baby, her expression softening. "Emma is my sister's child. My sister died 3 months ago, consumption." "I'm sorry for your loss," Silas said quietly. Vivian nodded in acknowledgement. "Her husband, Emma's father, he's not a good man. When Clara was alive, he controlled himself mostly, but after she died." She trailed off, then continued with renewed strength. "He started drinking more, got mean. I was living with them, helping with Emma. One night he came home drunk, angrier than usual. He hit me, said horrible things. Then he turned toward Emma's cradle. Her voice broke. I couldn't let him hurt her. I grabbed a skillet and struck him hard. He went down, bleeding. I didn't wait to see if he was dead or just unconscious. I took Emma and ran. When was this? Silas asked. 2 weeks ago, we were in San Antonio. Vivian adjusted Emma, who had fallen asleep at her breast. I've been traveling mostly at night, hiding during the day. I'm heading to El Paso. I have a friend there who might help us. Silas calculated the distance. That's over 400 miles from here. I know it's far, Vivian admitted, but Raymond, Emma's father, has connections, friends in the Rangers. If he's alive, he'll use them to find us. Is that why you didn't go to the law after he attacked you? Vivian gave a bitter laugh. The law? Raymond Lee is the law. He's a deputy marshal. Who would believe me against him? The gravity of her situation hit Silas fully. She wasn't just running from an abusive relative, she was running from a lawman with the resources to track her across Texas. You need more than one night's rest, Silas stated. Stay here, at least for a few days. Regain your strength. Vivian shook her head. I can't put you in that position. Harboring a fugitive, you defended yourself and a child against violence, Silas interrupted. That's not a crime in my book. It is when the man you struck is wearing a badge, Vivian countered. Silas considered this, then spoke with quiet conviction. Miss Lockwood, my ranch is remote. Few people come this way. You'll be safe here while you recover, and I can help you plan a safer route to El Paso. Vivian studied him, searching for deceit or ulterior motives. Finding none, her shoulders sagged slightly in relief. 3 days, she conceded. Then we need to move on. Silas nodded, though something in him already rebelled against the thought of them leaving. 3 days it is. True to his word, Silas slept in the barn that night, leaving Vivian and Emma the comfort of his bed. He lay awake for hours, thoughts churning. He had lived alone since Sarah's death, focusing on building his small cattle operation, keeping to himself except for necessary trips to town for supplies. Now, overnight, his quiet existence had been upended by a woman on the run and an infant who wasn't hers by blood but clearly was in every way that mattered. Morning came with the crowing of his rooster. Silas rose early, tended to the livestock, and was preparing breakfast when Vivian emerged from behind the curtain. She had clearly used some of his stored water to wash, and she'd done her best to mend the tears in her dress. Her dark hair was neatly braided down her back, and in her arms, Emma gurgled contentedly. Good morning, Silas greeted, trying not to stare. In the clear light of day, Vivian's beauty was even more evident, making his rough cabin seem suddenly inadequate. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in weeks, Vivian admitted, setting Emma on a blanket on the floor where the baby immediately began trying to roll over. Though I kept waking at every sound, expecting. No one knows you're here, Silas assured her, and no one's coming up to the ranch unannounced. We'd see the dust from miles away. Vivian nodded, though the wariness never fully left her eyes. I should help with breakfast. Already done, Silas replied, placing plates of eggs and bacon on the table. He'd even made biscuits, a rare indulgence for himself. But you could pour the coffee if you'd like. They fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine over breakfast, with Emma contentedly playing on her blanket. Vivian asked about the ranch, and Silas explained how he'd built it up over the last 5 years, starting with just 20 head of cattle and gradually expanding to nearly 100. It's not a big spread, he admitted, not like some of the ranches further east. But it's paid for and the land's good, the water rights are secure. It's impressive, Vivian said sincerely, to build all this yourself. I had help at first, Silas explained. When Sarah was alive, she was as good with cattle as any man I've known. You must miss her terribly, Vivian said softly. Silas nodded, surprised at how the familiar pain of loss seemed different somehow in Vivian's presence, not gone but changed. Every day, but less sharply now than before. After breakfast, Silas suggested Vivian rest while he tended to his morning chores. Instead, she insisted on helping, placing Emma in a makeshift sling across her chest. I'm not an invalid, Mr. Irwin, she stated firmly, and I won't be a burden while I'm here. Silas knew better than to argue with the determination in her eyes. Very well, But please, it's Silas. Throughout the morning, he found himself impressed by Vivian's capability. Despite her obvious city upbringing, she learned quickly, helping to feed the chickens and collect eggs, assisting with milking the cow, and even helping sort through supplies in the storage shed. "You've done this before," Silas observed as she expertly separated dried beans, discarding the damaged ones. "My father had a small farm outside Austin before he died," Vivian explained. "I helped my mother run it until she remarried and we moved to San Antonio. That's where Clara met Raymond." Her expression darkened at the mention of Emma's father. "How long were they married?" Silas asked carefully. 2 years. Emma came along after the first year." Vivian's gaze drifted to the baby who was napping in her sling. "Clara was so happy to be a mother. She never complained, even when it was clear Raymond wasn't the husband she deserved." "And you lived with them the whole time?" Vivian nodded. "After our mother died last year, I had nowhere else to go. I worked as a seamstress, contributed to the household. Raymond tolerated me because I was useful. I took care of Emma while Clara worked in his office, kept the house in order." Her voice hardened. "And after Clara died, he expected me to step into her place in every way." The implication was clear, and Silas felt a surge of anger toward this man he'd never met. "When he comes looking for you, it won't be out of concern for Emma, will it?" "No," Vivian confirmed grimly. "It will be because his pride was wounded. Because I defied him and took what he considers his property." "Emma isn't property," Silas said firmly, "and neither are you." Vivian gave him a sad smile. "The law doesn't always see it that way. A man has rights over his child and his household." "Some laws need changing," Silas replied simply. The day passed in companionable work, with Vivian gradually relaxing her guard. By evening, when they sat down to a supper of beans, cornbread, and the last of Silas's preserved venison, the atmosphere between them had evolved from cautious coexistence to something approaching friendship. After supper, as Vivian sat in the rocking chair nursing Emma before bed, she asked, "Why did you really stop to help us yesterday?" "The truth." Silas, who had been whittling by the fire, set aside his knife and wood. "I told you about Sarah and our baby. What I didn't tell you is that I found them too late." He stared into the flames. "I was 2 days' ride away delivering cattle to a buyer in Alpine. A neighbor came to check on Sarah when he saw no smoke from our chimney. He found her, already gone." Vivian's eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Silas. When I saw you yesterday, stumbling across that plain with a baby on your back, something just..." He struggled to find the words. "I couldn't ride past, not again." "You couldn't have known about Sarah," Vivian said gently. "Maybe not, but I knew about you." Silas met her gaze. "And I'm glad I stopped." The honesty in his voice created a moment of connection between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. In the firelight, with Emma drowsing at her breast and Silas's steady presence across from her, Vivian felt safer than she had in months. The next morning began much like the first, but with a new easiness between them. As they worked side by side repairing a section of corral fencing, Silas found himself watching Vivian more often than was proper. She had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and rolled up the sleeves of the old shirt he'd lent her, revealing slender but strong arms tanned by the sun. Emma watched from a shady spot nearby, propped against saddle blankets, occasionally babbling happily. "You're good with her," Silas commented. "Natural." Vivian smiled, her first genuine smile since arriving. "I've always loved children. Clara and I used to talk about having a house full of them when we were girls." The smile faded. Now Emma is all that's left of those dreams. "You'll make new dreams," Silas said. Vivian hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "Will I? As what, a single woman with a child who isn't mine by blood in a territory where women have few rights and fewer opportunities?" She shook her head. "I'm not naive, Silas. I know what awaits us in El Paso if we even make it that far. A life of scraping by, always looking over our shoulders." "It doesn't have to be that way," Silas began, but was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Vivian froze, her face draining of color. Silas instinctively moved between her and the approaching rider, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get Emma and go into the house," he instructed calmly. "Stay away from the windows. There's a trapdoor under the rug by the bed root cellar. If there's trouble, take her down there." Vivian didn't argue. She gathered Emma and hurried toward the cabin, her movements quick but controlled. Silas appreciated her composure in the face of danger. It spoke to both her character and the hardships she'd already endured. As the rider drew closer, Silas recognized the familiar figure of Ezra Johnson, the nearest neighbor whose ranch lay 10 miles to the east. Ezra was in his 60s, a widower who occasionally traded supplies with Silas but otherwise kept to himself. Relief flooded through Silas, though he remained cautious. "Afternoon, Ezra," Silas called as the older man reined in his horse. "What brings you out this way?" Ezra dismounted stiffly, nodding in greeting. "Silas was heading into Terlingua for supplies, thought I'd stop by. Saw some unusual tracks near my south pasture yesterday, looks like a posse came through." Silas's stomach tightened. "A posse looking for what?" "Not what, who?" Ezra removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Stopped and talked to them. Said they're looking for a woman who attacked a lawman up in San Antonio, stole his baby girl and ran." Ezra's shrewd eyes studied Silas's face. "They were asking if I'd seen a woman traveling alone with an infant." Silas kept his expression neutral. "What did you tell them?" "Told them I hadn't seen a soul in weeks, which is God's honest truth." Ezra replaced his hat. "But I thought you should know they're in the area. 4 men, well armed, led by a fella with a bandage on his head, calls himself Deputy Marshal Lee." The confirmation that Raymond Lee was not only alive but actively hunting Vivian sent a chill down Silas's spine. "I appreciate the warning, Ezra." Ezra hesitated, then asked carefully, "You been to town lately, Silas? Seen any strangers passing through?" "No," Silas answered truthfully. "Been keeping to the ranch." The older man nodded slowly. His eyes drifted to the cabin where a curtain had moved slightly at one of the windows. "Well," he said, climbing back onto his horse, "thought you should know. They said the woman's dangerous. Tried to kill that deputy in his sleep, according to him." "Did they say what she looked like?" Silas asked, trying to sound merely curious. "Dark-haired, green eyes. Pretty from the way the deputy described her. Name's Vivian Lockwood." Ezra's expression turned thoughtful. "Funny thing, though. The way that lawman talked about her. Something didn't sit right. I've known men with eyes like his before. Mean eyes." Silas nodded, grateful for Ezra's perceptiveness and apparent discretion. "Thanks for the warning, Ezra. I'll keep an eye out." "You do that." Ezra gathered his reins. "And Silas, whatever business you've got going on here, be careful. That marshal didn't strike me as the type to ask questions before shooting." With that cryptic parting, Ezra turned his horse and rode away. Silas watched until he disappeared over the ridge before hurrying to the cabin. Inside, he found Vivian standing tensely by the trapdoor, Emma clutched to her chest. "It was my neighbor," Silas explained quickly. "Not looking for you specifically, but he brought news. Raymond is alive and leading a search party. They're in the area." Vivian's face paled further, but her voice remained steady. "Then we need to leave. Now." "That's exactly what they'll be watching for," Silas countered. "Every trail, every road. They'll have men in Terlingua by now, probably in all the surrounding settlements." "So we're trapped," Vivian said, a note of despair creeping into her voice. "No," Silas moved to the window, scanning the horizon, "but we need to be smart. Ezra didn't give you away, in fact. I think he suspects you're here and chose not to mention it. But that won't stop Raymond from checking every homestead in the area eventually." "How long do we have?" Silas calculated quickly. "They were near Ezra's place yesterday, which is east of here. If they're moving methodically, checking each property, maybe 2 days before they reach us." Vivian sat heavily in a chair, Emma fussing in her arms. "I've put you in danger. I'm sorry, Silas." "Don't be," he replied firmly. "I made my choice when I brought you here." He paced the small cabin, thinking furiously. "We need to hide you, but not here. They'll search the house." "Where then?" Silas stopped pacing, a plan forming. "There's a line shack about 3 miles north of here up in the foothills. It's small, just a one-room shelter for when I'm working cattle in the north pasture. It's well hidden in a stand of cottonwoods. They might not even know to look for it." "When should we go?" "Tonight after dark." Silas began gathering supplies: food, water, blankets. "I'll take you there, get you settled, then come back here. When they arrive, they'll find just me, going about my business." Vivian stood, setting Emma down on the blanket. "And if they insist on searching your property, I'll let them. They won't find anything." Silas paused in his preparations. "But Vivian, you need to know if Raymond Lee is as connected as you say. He won't give up easily. This is just buying us time to figure out a more permanent solution." "Us?" Vivian questioned softly. Silas realized what he'd said and met her gaze steadily. "Yes, us. I'm not abandoning you and Emma now." Something shifted in Vivian's expression, gratitude mingled with a more complex emotion. "Why, you barely know us." Silas couldn't fully explain the certainty he felt, the fierce protectiveness that had taken root in him since finding Vivian on the plain. It defied rational explanation after just 2 days. "Sometimes," he said finally, "you just know when something's worth fighting for." The simple truth of his words hung in the air between them. Vivian's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she nodded in acceptance of his allegiance. They spent the rest of the day preparing carefully, speaking little. As dusk fell, Silas saddled Thunder and his packhorse, distributing the supplies between them. Vivian changed into the spare clothes. Silas had given her trousers and a shirt that were too large but could be belted and rolled up, making it easier for her to ride and move quickly if needed. Under cover of darkness, they set out for the line shack. Vivian rode Thunder with Emma securely wrapped against her chest, while Silas led the packhorse on foot, choosing their path carefully to minimize tracks. The night was clear, the stars providing just enough light to navigate by without risking a lantern. The line shack was as Silas had described, a single room with a small stone fireplace, nestled among cottonwoods beside a spring-fed creek. It was rustic but sound, with a narrow cot, a rough table, and 2 stools. Silas quickly arranged the supplies while Vivian settled Emma, who had remarkably slept through most of the journey. "There's enough food for a week," Silas explained. "Water from the spring is good to drink. Keep the fire small during the day, just enough for cooking to minimize smoke, and stay inside as much as possible." Vivian absorbed his instructions, the reality of their situation evident in her tense posture. "How will I know if it's safe, if they've gone?" "I'll come to you after dark, once I'm certain they've moved on." Silas hesitated. "Vivian, if something happens and I don't come back within 3 days, there's a map in that sack showing a route to El Paso that avoids the main trails. And there's money, not much, but enough to get you there if you're careful." "Don't talk like that," Vivian said sharply. "You'll be back." Silas smiled at her confidence. "I plan to be, but it's best to be prepared." The moment to leave had come, but Silas found himself reluctant to go. Standing in the doorway of the small shack, Vivian looked simultaneously vulnerable and fiercely determined, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I should get back," he said, not moving. "Make it look like nothing's out of the ordinary." Vivian nodded, then impulsively stepped forward and kissed his cheek. "Thank you, Silas, for everything." The unexpected warmth of her lips against his skin left Silas momentarily speechless. He nodded, touched his hat, and finally forced himself to turn away, leading Thunder back toward the ranch. The ride back seemed longer, his thoughts a tangled mess of worry for Vivian and Emma, plans for dealing with Raymond Lee and his posse, and the lingering sensation of Vivian's kiss. By the time Silas reached the ranch, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. He quickly settled the horses, rumpled his bed to make it look slept in, and began his normal morning routine, lighting the stove, fetching water, feeding the livestock. When the posse arrived just after noon, Silas was mending a saddle on the porch, his manner deliberately unhurried and unconcerned. 4 riders approached the ranch house, dust billowing behind them. The lead rider, a man in his 30s with a bandage around his head partially covered by his hat, pulled up short in the yard. "Afternoon," Silas called, setting aside his work and standing. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" The bandaged man dismounted, his movements betraying a lingering stiffness. He was tall and would have been handsome if not for the cold hardness in his eyes. Ezra had been right about that. "Deputy Marshal Raymond Lee," he introduced himself, not offering to shake hands. "I'm looking for a fugitive from justice, a woman traveling with an infant." Silas wiped his hands on a rag, his expression mildly curious. "Haven't seen any women around these parts with or without children." "What'd she do?" "Attempted murder," Lee said flatly. "She's my wife's sister. After my wife died, she attacked me in my sleep and kidnapped my daughter." He touched the bandage on his head, "Nearly split my skull open." Silas let out a low whistle. "Sounds serious. When was this?" 2 weeks ago." "We've been tracking her west." Lee's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we have a look around your place?" "Help yourself," Silas said easily, gesturing to the cabin. "Not much to see." Lee signaled to his men, who dismounted and began a systematic search of the property. One headed for the cabin, another to the barn, while the third checked the storage sheds and corral. Lee himself remained with Silas. "You live alone, Mr. Irwin?" "Silas Irwin, and yes, just me since my wife passed 3 years back." Lee studied him with cold assessment. "Lonely life." "Peaceful," Silas countered. "I prefer it that way. Seen any strangers pass through? Any unusual tracks?" Lee's gaze swept the surrounding landscape. "The woman I'm after is desperate, dangerous. She might have avoided the roads, cut across country." "Haven't noticed anything unusual," Silas replied. "But I've been focused on the ranch, haven't ridden the full property in a few days." One by one, Lee's men returned, each reporting nothing found. The marshal's frustration was evident in the tightening of his jaw. "Mind if I ask what your interest is in finding this woman?" Silas asked. "Besides justice, I mean, if she took your child." "Emma is my daughter," Lee said sharply. "My blood, that woman has no right to her. And the child's mother, your wife, she'd want you to find them." Something dangerous flashed in Lee's eyes. "My wife is dead. What she would have wanted is irrelevant." In that moment, Silas understood exactly why Vivian had fled with Emma. This man viewed the child as property, a possession to be claimed, not a life to be nurtured. "Well," Silas said carefully, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Marshal." Lee studied him for a long moment, as if sensing the insincerity in Silas's words. "If you see or hear anything, you're obligated to report it. Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense." "I understand the law," Silas assured him, meeting his gaze steadily. With a final suspicious glance, Lee mounted his horse. "We'll be continuing our search. I suggest you keep your doors locked, Mr. Irwin. As I said, the woman is dangerous." "I'll bear that in mind." The posse rode out, heading west toward Terlingua. Silas watched until they disappeared, then immediately began preparing for nightfall. He doubted Lee was completely convinced of his ignorance, and there was a real possibility the marshal might double back to check on him again. As darkness fell, Silas waited, alert for any sign of the posse's return. When the night remained quiet, he saddled Thunder and rode cautiously toward the line shack, taking a circuitous route and frequently stopping to listen for pursuers. When he finally reached the shack, he approached on foot, leading Thunder. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, and through the single window he could see the faint glow of a banked fire. He knocked softly in a pattern he'd agreed upon with Vivian. The door opened immediately, revealing Vivian with a rifle, his spare pointed steadily at his chest. Upon recognizing him, she lowered it with a sigh of relief. "You came back," she whispered, stepping aside to let him enter. "Of course I did," he replied, securing the door behind him. "How's Emma?" "Sleeping?" Vivian gestured to the cot where the baby lay bundled in blankets. "She's been good, barely fussed at all, as if she knows we need to be quiet." In the dim firelight, Vivian looked exhausted but resolute. She had adapted remarkably well to their situation, Silas thought, another testament to her strength. "They came," he said, settling onto one of the stools. Raymond and 3 others searched the place but found nothing. Did he believe you? Vivian asked anxiously. I don't think so, not entirely. He's suspicious by nature. Silas accepted the cup of coffee Vivian offered. He's heading west toward Terlingua, but I wouldn't be surprised if he circles back to check on me again. Vivian paled. Then you shouldn't be here if he follows you. I was careful, Silas assured her. No one followed me. He hesitated, then added, I spoke with him, Vivian. I saw what kind of man he is. You were right to take Emma and run. Tears suddenly welled in Vivian's eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if there was another way. There wasn't, Silas said firmly. That man sees Emma as a possession, not a child who needs love and protection. You did what any good mother would do. I'm not her mother, Vivian whispered. Yes, you are, Silas countered. In every way that matters. Vivian wiped her eyes, visibly pulling herself together. What now? If he doesn't believe you, it's not safe for us to go back to the ranch, but we can't stay here forever. Silas had been considering this problem since the posse left. I've been thinking about that. We have 2 options. Either you continue to El Paso as planned, or... He hesitated, suddenly uncertain, or what? Vivian prompted. Or we create a new plan altogether, one where you and Emma don't have to keep running. Silas met her gaze directly. One where you stay. Vivian stared at him. Stay here, Silas, that's not possible. Raymond would find us eventually. Not if you weren't Vivian Lockwood anymore, Silas said quietly. Not if Emma wasn't Emma Lee. Understanding dawned in Vivian's eyes. You're suggesting a new identity, a new story. Silas leaned forward, his voice intense. Listen, I have a friend in Terlingua, Samuel Moore, the preacher. He owes me a favor, several actually. He could marry us, backdate the certificate. We could say you're my wife, that you've been living in Alpine with family while I got the ranch established, and you've just returned. Emma would be our daughter. Vivian's lips parted in shock. Marriage? Silas, you can't be serious, we barely know each other. I know enough, Silas replied steadily. I know you're brave and strong and that you'd do anything to protect Emma. I know you work hard and don't complain. I know when I'm with you, my house feels like a home again for the first time in 3 years. That's gratitude or loneliness speaking, Vivian protested. Not a basis for marriage, maybe, Silas conceded. Or maybe it's something else entirely, something that could grow given time. He reached out, carefully taking her hand. I'm not proposing romance, Vivian, I'm offering partnership. Protection. A home for you and Emma where you'd be safe. Vivian didn't withdraw her hand, but uncertainty filled her eyes. And if Raymond discovers the truth, he'd kill you without hesitation. Let me worry about Raymond, Silas said. With a legal marriage certificate and Emma recognized as my child, his claims would be harder to pursue, especially out here where people mind their own business. And over time, memories fade, people forget. It's a tremendous risk, Vivian said, for all of us. Life is risk, Silas replied simply. The question is which risks are worth taking. Vivian fell silent, her gaze drifting to Emma sleeping peacefully on the cot. Silas could see the conflict in her expression, hope warring with fear, caution with longing. You don't have to decide tonight, he said gently. Think about it, I'll come back tomorrow night and we'll talk more. Vivian nodded slowly. Thank you, Silas, not just for this offer, but for everything, for seeing me as a person, not a possession. That's not something that needs thanks, Silas said, rising to leave. It's just being human. As he rode back to the ranch under the star-filled sky, Silas reflected on the enormity of what he'd proposed. Marriage to a woman he'd known for just days, claiming a child that wasn't his by blood, defying a dangerous man with the law on his side, it was madness by any rational measure. And yet, it felt right in a way nothing had since Sarah's death. The ranch, which had been merely a place to exist since losing his wife and child, could be a home again. The future, which had stretched before him empty and colorless, now held possibility. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Silas went about his chores mechanically, his mind constantly returning to Vivian and Emma in the lined shack, and to the decision that awaited. Several times, he caught himself listening for Emma's babbling or looking toward the kitchen expecting to see Vivian at the stove. Habits formed in just 2 days that now left the cabin feeling achingly empty. When night finally fell, Silas prepared to return to the line shack. He was saddling Thunder when the sound of approaching riders froze him in place. Moving silently, he secured the barn door and peered through a crack between the boards. Raymond Lee and one of his men rode into the yard, their horses moving slowly in the darkness. They dismounted near the cabin, speaking in low voices. Lee gestured for his companion to circle around back while he approached the front door. Silas cursed silently. His rifle was in the cabin, and while he had his revolver, he was effectively trapped in the barn unless he wanted to reveal himself. He watched as Lee knocked on the cabin door, then tested it and found it unlocked. The marshal disappeared inside, and moments later, light bloomed as he lit a lamp. Through the windows, Silas could see Lee moving methodically through the cabin, opening cupboards, looking under the bed, checking the root cellar. The search was more thorough than the previous days, and Lee's body language suggested growing frustration. After what seemed an eternity, Lee emerged from the cabin, meeting his companion in the yard. They spoke briefly before mounting their horses. To Silas's alarm, instead of riding out, they dismounted again near the barn. Silas quickly considered his options. He could try to hide among the hay bales, but if they searched thoroughly, they'd find him, and his freshly saddled horse would be impossible to explain. Fighting 2 armed men was risky at best. His best option was to confront them openly, maintain his story, and hope they'd leave. Decision made, Silas exited the stall and called out, "Evening, gentlemen. Twice in 2 days I'm starting to feel popular." Lee's hand immediately went to his gun, but he stopped short of drawing it. "Irwin, why are you in the barn at this hour?" Silas gestured to Thunder. "Was about to ride out to check my north pasture. Got a few head of cattle up there I haven't seen in a couple days." "At night," Lee's skepticism was evident. "Moon's bright enough," Silas replied easily. "And it's cooler, for the horse and for me." Lee stepped closer, his eyes hard. "Funny thing, Irwin, we asked around about you in Terlingua today. People say you keep to yourself, don't cause trouble, but they also mentioned you were married once. Wife died in childbirth." Silas maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly he tensed. "That's right." "Made me wonder," Lee continued, "if maybe you have a soft spot for women in trouble, the kind of soft spot that might lead a man to help a fugitive." "As I told you yesterday, Marshal, I haven't seen any women around here." Silas met Lee's gaze steadily. "And while I sympathize with your situation, I've got my own concerns, like checking on my cattle before coyotes get them." Lee studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to pursue his suspicions. Finally, he stepped back. "We'll be moving on tomorrow, heading further west. If she passed through here, she's long gone by now. Probably for the best," Silas said carefully. "Sounds like you've both suffered enough." Something dangerous flashed in Lee's eyes. "Don't presume to understand my situation, Irwin. That woman stole what's mine. I won't rest until I get it back." The way he referred to Emma as it confirmed everything Vivian had told Silas. This was not a man grieving for a missing child. This was a man whose pride had been wounded, whose possession had been taken. "Well, I wish you luck in your search," Silas said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Lee nodded curtly and mounted his horse, his companion following suit. As they rode away, Silas noticed they were heading east, not west as Lee had claimed they would. The marshal had lied, perhaps hoping to catch Silas in a revealing action if he believed the search had moved on. Silas waited a full hour, checking and rechecking that the riders were truly gone, before continuing his preparations to visit Vivian. He took a more circuitous route than ever, doubling back several times to ensure he wasn't followed, before finally approaching the line shack. Vivian opened the door at his knock, relief flooding her face. "I was worried," she admitted. "You're later than yesterday." "Lee came back," Silas explained, stepping inside. He and one of his men searched the place again, more thoroughly this time. I had to wait to make sure they were truly gone before coming to you. Concern replaced relief in Vivian's expression. Did he suspect? Yes, Silas admitted, taking off his hat. He's suspicious by nature and he's been asking about me in town. He knows about Sarah, about losing her in childbirth. I think he wonders if that would make me sympathetic to your situation. He's right, Vivian said softly. It did. Their eyes met in the dim light of the shack, and something unspoken passed between them. Vivian seemed different tonight, more settled, more certain. I've been thinking about your proposal, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Emma was awake, playing contentedly on a blanket with some carved wooden animals Silas had left at the shack on his previous visits. About becoming your wife, about giving Emma your name, Silas nodded, suddenly tense with anticipation. And it's a risk, Vivian stated. A tremendous one. If Raymond ever discovered the truth, he'd kill us both without hesitation. I understand the danger, Silas assured her. But, Vivian continued, staying on the run with Emma is also a risk. A life of constant fear, never setting down roots, always looking over our shoulders. She shook her head. That's no life for a child or for anyone. Hope began to rise in Silas's chest. Does that mean? It means yes, Vivian said quietly. If your offer still stands, I accept, not just for protection or for Emma, though those are reasons enough. But because in 3 days, you've shown me more kindness and respect than Raymond showed Clara in 2 years of marriage. She hesitated. I can't promise love, Silas, not yet, but I can promise loyalty, partnership, and effort to build something good. That's more than enough, Silas replied, his voice rough with emotion. Love can grow from those roots, given time. Vivian nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Yes, I believe it can. The plan they formed that night was both simple and audacious. Silas would ride to Terlingua the next day to speak with Preacher Moore. If the preacher agreed to help, and Silas was confident he would, given the many times he'd assisted the man with repairs to the small church and donations of beef for community suppers, they would create a paper trail establishing Vivian as Silas's wife of 2 years, married in Alpine while passing through on cattle business. Emma would be recorded as their daughter, born a year into the marriage while Vivian was staying with fictitious relatives in Alpine. The story would explain why no one in Terlingua had met Silas's wife before they'd been separated by necessity while he established the ranch, and she had only just joined him with their child. We'll need to be consistent with dates, Vivian pointed out. People will ask questions. Let them, Silas replied. The beauty of the frontier is that people accept what you tell them, especially if you've been a good neighbor. And records are sparse. Who's to say we weren't married in Alpine 2 years ago? Raymond might try to disprove it, Vivian warned. By then, we'll have established ourselves, and his influence doesn't reach as far out here as it does in San Antonio. Silas took her hand. It won't be easy at first. There will be gossip, questions, but we'll weather it together. Vivian squeezed his hand, her eyes showing determination despite her fear. Together, she agreed. The next morning, Silas rode to Terlingua, his story prepared. To his relief, Preacher Samuel Moore was alone in the small church when he arrived, making repairs to a broken pew. Silas Irwin, the older man greeted warmly. Twice in a month must be some kind of record. What brings you to town? Need your help, Samuel, Silas said, removing his hat. And your discretion. The preacher's expression turned serious. Of course, what's troubling you? Silas took a deep breath and laid out the situation, not the complete truth, but enough of it to convey the gravity of Vivian and Emma's predicament. He explained that Vivian was fleeing an abusive situation, that the man pursuing her was dangerous and vindictive, and that he had offered her marriage as protection. I need documentation, Silas concluded. A marriage certificate dated 2 years ago, records showing Emma as our child. I know it's asking you to bend the truth, Samuel, but it's for a good cause, to protect an innocent woman and child. Samuel studied him thoughtfully. You're asking me to falsify church records, Silas. That's no small thing. I know, Silas acknowledged. And I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. Tell me something, the preacher said. Is this purely about protection, or are there deeper feelings involved? Silas hesitated, then answered honestly. It started as protection, but yes, there's more to it now. I care for her, Samuel. And for the child, more than I thought possible after Sarah. A slow smile spread across Samuel's weathered face. Then perhaps this isn't as much of a falsehood as it appears. The paperwork may be backdated, but the commitment is real, absolutely, Silas confirmed. Samuel nodded, seeming to come to a decision. I heard about those men asking after a woman and child, didn't care for the look of them, especially that marshal. He rose, moving to a cabinet where he kept church records. I suppose if I were to find an overlooked marriage certificate from 2 years ago, performed while I was visiting the church in Alpine, that would just be correcting an administrative oversight, wouldn't it? Relief washed over Silas. That's exactly how I see it. Bring her to me tonight after dark, Samuel instructed. We'll make this official in the eyes of God, even if we're adjusting the timeline for the records. And Silas, I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, Samuel, Silas replied honestly. So do I. With the preacher's help secured, Silas quickly gathered the supplies they would need: food, clothing for Vivian and Emma, and a few personal items to make the cabin feel more like a home. He was careful in his purchases, buying from different shops to avoid drawing attention and offering plausible explanations when necessary. At the general store, when questioned about the baby clothes, he mentioned casually that his sister's child had outgrown them and he was sending replacements. At the dressmaker's, the simple calico dress he purchased was explained as a gift for his housekeeper in Alpine, who was minding his property there. By late afternoon, Silas had completed his errands without raising suspicion and was ready to return to the line shack. As he was mounting Thunder, however, a familiar voice called his name. Irwin, a word, if you please. Raymond Lee stood in the street, watching him with cold eyes. Silas schooled his features to reveal nothing as the marshal approached. Marshal Lee, he acknowledged. Thought you'd be headed west by now. Change of plans, Lee replied. Got word the woman might have headed south toward the border instead. He gestured to the packages tied to Silas's saddle. Quite a shopping trip for a man who lives alone. Ranch supplies, Silas explained easily. And some things to send to my sister in Austin. She has young children. Lee's eyes narrowed skeptically. Interesting. I don't recall you mentioning a sister yesterday. You didn't ask about my family, Marshal. Silas kept his tone neutral. Was there something specific you wanted to discuss? Lee stepped closer, his voice lowering. I know you're hiding something, Irwin. I can feel it. Men like you, soft-hearted, principled, you're easy to read. If I find out you've been harboring that woman and my child, there won't be a place in Texas you can hide. Silas met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. As I've told you repeatedly, Marshal, I haven't seen any woman with a child. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get back to my ranch before dark. Without waiting for a response, Silas turned Thunder and rode out of town, maintaining a deliberate, unhurried pace despite the tension coiling in his stomach. He took a circuitous route back to the ranch, then waited until dusk before retrieving Vivian and Emma from the line shack. Vivian had dressed Emma in the cleanest clothes they had available and had done her best with her own appearance, braiding her hair neatly and washing her face and hands in the creek. Despite the simplicity of her attire, Silas thought she had never looked more beautiful, perhaps, because tonight would transform their temporary arrangement into something permanent. You look lovely, he told her honestly as he helped her mount Thunder. Vivian smiled, a touch of shyness in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Hardly appropriate for a wedding, but thank you. The preacher is expecting us, Silas explained as they rode toward Terlingua. He's agreed to help with the documentation we discussed. But more importantly, he'll perform an actual ceremony tonight, a real marriage, even if the paperwork says it happened 2 years ago. Vivian's arms tightened around Emma. Raymond was in town today. Yes, Silas confirmed. He's suspicious, but he has no proof. And after tonight, his claims will be much harder to pursue. They reached the small church just after full dark. Samuel was waiting for them, having lit only a single lamp to avoid attracting attention. He greeted Vivian warmly, immediately putting her at ease with his gentle manner. "So this is the young lady," he said, smiling at Emma, who regarded him solemnly from Vivian's arms. "And this little one, beautiful child. Thank you for helping us, preacher," Vivian said sincerely. "I know what we're asking isn't exactly," Samuel held up a hand. "The Lord's work often happens in unexpected ways, my dear. I believe he brought you to Silas's path for a reason." He gestured to the altar. "Shall we proceed?" The ceremony was brief but meaningful, conducted by lamplight in the empty church. Vivian handed Emma to Samuel to hold while she and Silas exchanged vows. The traditional words "to have" and "to hold," for better or worse, in sickness and in health, took on a deeper significance given the circumstances that had brought them together. When Samuel pronounced them husband and wife, Silas gently took Vivian's face in his hands and kissed her their first kiss, soft and chaste, but filled with promise. As they separated, Silas was surprised to see tears in Vivian's eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "A husband who looks at me with kindness, a future that holds hope instead of fear." "You have it now," Silas assured her, taking Emma from Samuel and cradling her with one arm while keeping his other around Vivian. "Both of you do." After the ceremony, Samuel presented them with the documents they needed: a marriage certificate dated 2 years prior, church records showing the same, and a notation of Emma's birth a year after the supposed wedding. It was, as Samuel pointed out, essentially a new identity for both Vivian and Emma. "Mrs. Vivian Irwin," Samuel said, handing her the certificate, "and Miss Emma Irwin. May God bless and keep you both." They thanked the preacher profusely before slipping out the back of the church and making their way home, for it truly was home now under the star-filled Texas sky. The first weeks of their marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Though they presented themselves as husband and wife to the outside world, in private they maintained separate sleeping arrangements, with Silas on a pallet in the main room while Vivian and Emma took the bed. It was an arrangement born of respect and the recognition that their feelings, while genuine, were still developing. To establish their cover story, Silas took Vivian and Emma to Terlingua 10 days after the ceremony, introducing his wife and daughter to the townspeople. The story they had crafted that Vivian had been staying with family in Alpine while Silas established the ranch, and had only recently joined him with their daughter, was accepted without much question. If anyone found it odd that Silas had never mentioned a wife before, they were too polite to say so directly. There were moments of tension, particularly when they encountered Raymond Lee in the general store during one visit to town. The marshal's eyes had narrowed with suspicion as Silas introduced Vivian as his wife of 2 years, but faced with the supporting documentation Samuel had provided and the casual acceptance of the townspeople, he could do little but glare. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Irwin," he had said, his tone making it clear he believed no such thing. "You remind me of someone I'm looking for, a woman who stole my child." Vivian, showing remarkable composure, had smiled pleasantly. "How awful for you, Marshal. I hope you find them soon." As they left the store, Vivian's hand had trembled in Silas's, but her spine remained straight, her head high. It was only when they returned to the ranch that she collapsed into a chair, shaking. "He knows," she whispered. "He suspects, at least." "Suspicion isn't proof," Silas reminded her. "And every day that passes, our story becomes more established, and his claims seem more far-fetched." True to Silas's prediction, as weeks turned to months, Raymond Lee's presence in the area became less frequent. He made one final visit to the ranch 4 months after their wedding, arriving unannounced while Silas was mending fences in the north pasture. Vivian, alone in the cabin with Emma, had greeted him with a calmness that belied her inner terror. "Marshal Lee," she acknowledged, standing in the doorway with Emma on her hip. "My husband isn't here at the moment." "I know," Lee replied, his eyes cold as they studied Emma. "I saw him riding north earlier. Thought it might be a good opportunity for us to talk privately, Mrs. Irwin." "I have nothing to say to you, Marshall," Vivian stated firmly. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my property." Lee's lips twisted in a humorless smile. "Your property, that's rich. You know, I've been doing some checking. Inquiries in Alpine about the Irwin wedding. Funny thing, no one seems to recall it. Almost like it never happened." "My husband and I were passing through on cattle business," Vivian replied, the prepared explanation coming easily now with practice. "The ceremony was small, private. I'm not surprised it wasn't the talk of the town." "And the child?" Lee's gaze fixed on Emma, who stared back at him solemnly. She has Clara's eyes. For a moment, Vivian's composure faltered at the mention of her sister. "I don't know what you're talking about, Marshall. Emma is my daughter." "Is she?" Lee took a step closer. "I think we both know the truth, Vivian. I think we both know whose child that is." Vivian's arms tightened around Emma. "My husband will be back soon. I suggest you be gone before he returns." "Your husband," Lee sneered. "That arrangement won't protect you forever. Sooner or later I'll prove what you did and I'll take what's mine." "There's nothing here that belongs to you," Vivian replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "Now leave before I fetch my husband's rifle." For a tense moment, Lee stood his ground, rage evident in every line of his body. Then abruptly he turned and mounted his horse. "This isn't over," he called as he rode away. Not by a long shot. When Silas returned and Vivian told him of the encounter, his first instinct was to ride after Lee. Vivian stopped him, her hand on his arm. "That's what he wants," she said. "A confrontation, violence that would separate us." She shook her head. "We need to be smarter than that." Silas recognized the wisdom in her words, though it did nothing to quell his anger at Lee's intrusion and threats. "You're right," he admitted, "but we need to be prepared." He's not going to give up easily. The solution came from an unexpected source. Ezra Johnson, Silas's elderly neighbor, arrived at the ranch the following week with news. "That marshal who was asking about the woman and child," he said without preamble as he accepted a cup of coffee from Vivian. "He's been reassigned. Seems there were some complaints about his conduct in San Antonio after his wife died. Drinking on duty. Threatening behavior. The Texas Rangers are sending him to El Paso." Relief washed over Silas and Vivian, though they were careful not to show it too openly. "That's quite a distance," Silas observed. 400 miles, Ezra confirmed. "And word is he's not happy about it. Fought the reassignment, but the order came from high up." The older man's shrewd eyes studied them both. "Thought you might want to know." "We appreciate the information, Ezra," Silas said sincerely. "Very much." After the neighbor left, Silas and Vivian allowed themselves to truly celebrate for the first time since Raymond's threats began. El Paso was far enough away that his influence would be significantly diminished, and the reassignment suggested his reputation and credibility were already damaged. "It doesn't mean we're completely safe," Vivian cautioned, ever practical. "He could still cause trouble." "But we've bought time," Silas pointed out. "Time for our story to become truth in everyone's minds. Time for Emma to grow up known as nothing but Emma Irwin, daughter of Silas and Vivian." Time, as it happened, was exactly what they needed, not just for security, but for their relationship to evolve from a partnership of necessity to something deeper. The transition happened gradually, in quiet moments that accumulated like water filling a well. It was in the way Silas began to linger at the breakfast table, enjoying Vivian's company rather than rushing to his chores. It was in the way Vivian's eyes followed him when he worked outside, admiration replacing her initial wariness. It was in the way they both delighted in Emma's achievements, her first steps across the cabin floor, her first words, her infectious laughter. 6 months after their wedding, as winter settled over the Texas landscape, Silas returned from tending the cattle to find Vivian teaching Emma to clap her hands in time to a song. The sight of them, Vivian's face alight with joy, Emma, giggling with delight, struck him with a force that took his breath away. This was his family, not by blood or by legal fiction, but by choice and growing love. That night, after Emma was asleep, Silas approached Vivian as she sat by the fire mending one of his shirts. "I've been thinking," he said, settling beside her, "about us, about our arrangement." Vivian set aside her sewing, something wary entering her expression. "What about it?" "When we married, we agreed it was for protection, for practicality." Silas chose his words carefully. "But these past months, living together, raising Emma together, my feelings have changed." "Changed how?" Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Vivian," Silas said simply. "Not just as a partner or a friend, though you are both those things. I love you as a man loves a woman he wants to share his life with, truly share it in every way." Vivian's eyes glistened in the firelight. "Silas, you don't need to answer now," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know, whatever you feel, whatever you want from our marriage, I'll respect it." Vivian rose from her chair and knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "I love you too," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I think I have for months, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it might be gratitude confused with deeper feelings, afraid you might feel obligated to return the sentiment." Silas lifted a hand to cup her cheek. "There's no obligation in love." Their kiss was different from the chaste one they'd shared at their wedding, deeper, filled with months of growing affection and the promise of passion long restrained. When they parted, both breathless, a decision had been made without words. That night, Silas moved from his pallet in the main room to the bed they now truly shared as husband and wife. Their lovemaking was tender, a discovery of each other that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if their bodies recognized what their hearts had already acknowledged. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, vegetables sprouting in the garden Vivian had expanded, and the news that their family would grow by one more the following winter. The revelation of Vivian's pregnancy transformed Silas, his joy tempered only by the memory of losing Sarah in childbirth. "It won't happen again," Vivian assured him, recognizing the fear behind his eyes. "I'm strong, healthy, and will take every precaution." True to her word, as her pregnancy progressed, Vivian accepted Silas's protective measures without complaint, his insistence that she rest more, his arrangement for the midwife in Terlingua to visit regularly, his determination to have everything ready well before the baby was due. In December of 1879, just over a year after their wedding, Vivian gave birth to a son they named James, after Silas's father. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, and when Silas held his son for the first time, the healing of his old grief felt complete. "He's perfect," Silas whispered, sitting beside Vivian on the bed where Emma, now nearly 2, had been allowed to join them to meet her brother. "You're all perfect." Vivian smiled tiredly, her hand finding his. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted. "A husband I love, children, a home where I feel safe." "You deserve all of it and more," Silas assured her, "and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." As the years passed, the Irwin family flourished. The ranch expanded, with Silas acquiring additional land and increasing his cattle herd. Vivian, who had discovered a talent for gardening, began selling preserves and honey in Terlingua, building a small business that thrived alongside the ranch. Emma grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her mother Clara's green eyes and a confidence born of being securely loved. She showed an early aptitude for horsemanship that made Silas burst with pride. James, sturdy and thoughtful, became his father's shadow around the ranch, absorbing everything Silas taught him about cattle and the land. 2 more children joined the family over the years, another son, Thomas, born in 1882, and finally a daughter, Sarah, named for Silas's first wife in 1885. Each birth strengthened the bond between Silas and Vivian, their partnership deepening into a love story that neither could have imagined when they first met on that dusty plain. They never forgot the circumstances that had brought them together. Emma was told the truth when she was 12, old enough to understand but young enough that she had no memories of Raymond Lee or the early days of fear. Silas and Vivian explained her origins carefully, emphasizing that family was created by love, not just by blood. "So you're not really my father?" Emma had asked Silas, her young face serious. "Not by blood," Silas had answered honestly. "But in every way that matters, in love, in responsibility, in pride for the person you're becoming, I am absolutely your father." Emma had considered this, then nodded decisively. "Good. Because I wouldn't want any other father but you." News of Raymond Lee reached them occasionally through the years. He had indeed been transferred to El Paso, where his behavior had apparently deteriorated further. Reports of drunkenness, abuses of power, and finally, dismissal from his position filtered back to Terlingua. The last they heard in 1888 was that he had died in a saloon brawl, killed by a man he had wrongfully arrested and beaten the previous year. The news brought a complex mix of emotions for Vivian: relief that the threat was finally, irrevocably gone, but also sadness for the waste of a life consumed by bitterness and rage. "I wonder sometimes," she confided to Silas the night they received the news, "what might have been different if Clara had never met him, if she had found someone like you instead." "We can't change the past," Silas replied, holding her close. "But we honored Clara by giving Emma the life she deserved. I think your sister would be proud of that." By 1893, 15 years after Silas had found Vivian fleeing across the Texas plains with a baby on her back, the Lone Star Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in Brewster County. The original cabin had been expanded into a comfortable 2-story home, with a wide porch where the family gathered in the evenings to watch the sunset over the Chizos Mountains. On the anniversary of their wedding, now celebrated on the actual date rather than the fictitious one created for their cover story, Silas took Vivian for a ride to the spot where they had first met. The landscape had changed little, still rugged, still beautiful in its harsh way, but the memories it held transformed it into something special. Dismounting from their horses, they stood together looking out over the plains. "You ever regret it?" Silas asked, his arm around Vivian's waist. Taking a chance on a stranger that day, Vivian leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his shoulder. At 42, she was still beautiful, the years having added character rather than diminished her appeal. "Never," she answered honestly. "Not for a single moment." "Even with all the uncertainty at the beginning, the fear, especially with those things," Vivian replied. "Because they showed me who you truly were. A man who would face danger to protect those who needed it. A man who saw value in a woman and child society would have discarded." She turned in his arms to face him. "When you said you're done running, it wasn't a threat or a capture, it was a promise of sanctuary. Of home." Silas kissed her then, the gesture as natural as breathing after 15 years together. When they parted, he smiled, still captivated by the woman who had transformed his life. "I think I loved you even then," he admitted. "Something in me recognized something in you even before I knew your name." "I was too frightened to recognize love," Vivian countered with a small smile. "But I did recognize goodness, and that was enough to take the first step." As they rode back to the ranch where their children awaited them, Emma, now 17, and preparing to attend a women's college in Austin, James, 14, and already showing a head for business, Thomas, 11, and dreaming of becoming a doctor, and little Sarah at 8, the image of her mother Silas reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a chance encounter. A desperate woman fleeing with a baby on her back, a lonely rancher with an empty house and a heart still capable of love. A marriage begun as protection that had blossomed into something neither could have imagined. "You know," Silas said as their home came into view, "when I told you you're done running, I had no idea how true those words would become." Vivian smiled, the piece of their life together evident in her expression. "The best kind of truth," she replied, "is the kind we create together." Hand in hand, they rode the final distance home, toward the family and the future they had built from the most unlikely of beginnings.